helped us kick off this concert series in 2023 when he gave a half-hour recital to dedicate our work. It's been almost 2 years now since St. John's installed the new Walker organ. This organ is fully digital, meaning that all the sounds are computer-generated and amplified through a speaker system. Before this, we had a molded pipe organ for nearly 40 years, which toward the end of its life was in need of a number of expensive repairs. You can read a bit more about the organ in your programs, but what I will say is that in the end, we have the best of both worlds, because we kept all of the pipe work that you can see in the loft, but we purchased a new organ which sounds very authentic and fits the acoustics of the church very well. Now, I won't take too much of your time because you're not here to see me anyway, but I do want to say a few things about Conrad before he begins. When you get a chance, take some time to read Conrad's biography. You'll figure this out pretty soon, but he is incredibly talented. And he's been around the gamut a little bit. He served in churches, synagogues, community choirs, in addition to him teaching lessons, working on education initiatives, and gigging around in many different places. He's also a great personal friend of mine. He and I met around 5 years ago when I was living in Harrisburg. And I'm grateful that every time I say, "Hey Conrad, do you want to do a recital in Maryland?" he keeps saying yes. I know that he is very excited to be here today, and I'm sure that you will be just as glad that he came too. A few logistical things before we get started. You might notice there's no intermission in the program. Should you need to use the restroom or otherwise head up, of course, please do so. But please try to do so in between pieces so as to minimize distractions. Furthermore, on the topic of distractions, please take a moment to double check that your cell phone and any other devices are turned off or put on silent. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of 5 musical events that we are putting on this year at St. John's. This church is a fantastic place for musical performances, and I'm thrilled that we have a concert series where we can showcase our musicians and these acoustics. All of our concerts are an extension of the St. John's Music Ministry, and as a result, they will always be open and free to all. However, in order to help continue to put on these concerts, we look to your donations. Last concert season, we raised well over $1,000 from all of our events combined. And we were not only able to pay for the guest musicians who came, but we were also able to purchase new equipment for the hand-up choir, which they used for their own concert this past October. Your donations continue to contribute to the overall musical life of St. John's, both what we do at these events and also on Sunday mornings. Any funds that are received today will be evenly split between the St. John's Music Ministry and our guest recitalists. So, to those of you who are able and willing to make a contribution, on behalf of the entire music ministry, thank you very much. And now, will you please join me in welcoming Mr. Conrad Smith.
I'm very excited to be back. This is a lovely instrument in a wonderful space, and on top of it all, Justin is such an amazing musician to work with. I've lost count of how many different set lists I sent him for this program, but he was patient to the end. So an interesting piece to start the program with. Often, we like to start an organ concert really loud and really fast. But Justin asked me, since it was the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord, if I could do something liturgically appropriate, to which I responded, what's the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord? You too may be wondering, but in fact, I learned this morning from our mutual friend, probably, that the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord is where we get Punxsutawney Phil. Do any of you know who Punxsutawney Phil is? Okay, yeah, if you're from my neck of the woods, you do. He is our prognosticating groundhog. Yeah, I don't know, we got some weird traditions up there. Anywho, it is traditionally 40 days after Christmas, and it's when we celebrate Mary and Joseph bringing Jesus to the temple to do the rites of blessing for the firstborn. And so I chose the hymn setting this morning, Wie schön luehctet Morgenstern, which, pardon my German, but basically translates to how brightly shines the morning star. And for this feast, it's traditional to bless candles. And if you're like us, the more candles, the better. So Christ was said to be the light to enlighten the Gentiles, and hence how brightly shines the morning star is quite the appropriate hymn for this. When I picked this, I didn't realize it at the time, but I programmed 3 fugues in a row, which, being challenging enough for me to play, is also a lot to listen to. But it surprised me at first, because I didn't think of Buxtehude as a fugue. It's really more of a fantasia, but in the midst of the fantasia, he has several different fugues. I know some of you, who knows what a fugue is? Yeah, who doesn't know what a fugue is? All right, I'm talking to you guys. A fugue is a technique that organists use to show how crazy they are. I mean, how smart they are. Maybe a little bit of both. But they take a theme, usually a couple of measures long, and they play it, and then they play it starting on a different note, and they accompany it with the other hand. And then they play it starting on the same note again, and they accompany it with both hands. And then they play it with their feet while keeping those other voices going, and it gets a little crazy and out of hand. I wanted to show you these 2 fugues back to back, because people often will say to me, was Bach really that great? Well, Buxtehude wrote that fantasy which you just heard around the same time that Bach wrote the piece that I'm about to play. And one of the things you're going to notice right off the bat is Buxtehude's piece is kind of scenes. It's thematic. It has a little chunk, and then a little chunk, and then a little chunk, and a little chunk, and it just all gets put together that way. Bach's Prelude and Fugue sets one scene, and it's dark, and it's loud, and it's hard, and challenging. So when you compare these two, keep in mind these were written pretty much the same time, but could not be further from each other in compositional complexity. It also has a bunch of different names. That's beside the point. We're not getting into that. So it's kind of surprising to see, right, that those two pieces were written around about the same time. And Buxtehude was a very talented composer, but boy, it's hard to hold a candle to Bach. Okay, that's my last candle joke, I think. One more fugue. Are you ready? Yes, all right. So fast forward about 100 years. Bach, believe it or not, was not the most popular guy when he was around. So most of the people forgot his music when he died. And we have Johannes Brahms to thank for rescuing his music and reintroducing it into the world. He introduced it to a young man, I believe, named Mendelssohn. And Mendelssohn was known for touring England with his organ works. Now, English organs were a little bit different than the organs Bach would have known. Namely, in that if they had pedal boards, they were usually very small. Organs are pretty expensive, you may know that, so they cut corners by leaving out pipes and leaving out pedal boards. So Mendelssohn wrote his pieces for smaller instruments. They would have had a much different sound, and likely wouldn't have had a pedal board. So interestingly, most of his organ works, you can actually play the pedal part with the left hand if you're really good with your left hand. I'm not. So I'm going to play them on the pedals. Enjoy your third and final, 100 years later, fugue. now for something completely different. If I could invite you all to take a deep Olivier Messiaen is one of the most prolific and progressive organ composers to ever live, and is quite possibly one of my favorites. When I was in college, I thought he was a nut. And the older I get, the more I can't stop listening to it. It's something else. Messiaen composed between the 30s and the 70s. He was very interested in Indian ragas, which are rhythms but also melodies. And he experimented with something called modes of limited transposition. Can we all try saying that? Modes of limited transposition. So, if you've ever played a C scale, you know that it's a series of half steps and whole steps. And if you take that series of half steps and whole steps and you start it on a different note, you get a different scale. But Messiaen's modes worked differently. They were a series of half steps and whole steps, but they were such that if you started them on certain notes, they were the same scale. So the most famous one he uses is the octatonic scale, which has 8 notes. We'll come back to that in just a second. But because it has 8 notes, when you start it on the C, it's a different scale as when you started on the C sharp, as when you started on the D. But when you started on the D sharp, it's the same scale as when you started on the C. So it only has 3 transpositions. Limited transposition. Now, if you want to look good at a party, you can say, oh, I much prefer the organ music of limited transposition. You're welcome. Or I'm sorry, if you ever actually try to use that. The octatonic scale is one of the main reasons organists don't like to play his music, because our notation system is set up for scales of 7 notes, and if you make a scale with 8 notes, one note always has to have an accidental in front of it, which means you're going to be reading a lot of accidentals, which is very challenging because Messiaen's music is often very fast. You'll note this piece bears a particular exception. say the least. I've been asked to speak about ranks in the organ, which I'd like to do, but then also I'd like to just take a moment to draw attention. There are two particular things that draw together Messiaen and Hindemith, and are also timely and poignant. I believe it was Monday, I can't quite remember the date, but last week we observed Holocaust Remembrance Day, and Messiaen himself was a French nationalist who was interned in prison camps in Nazi Germany. He, in that camp, was given access to musical instruments because it made the guards happy. And so he quite famously composed the Quartet for the End of Time with 4 instruments which he had access to at the time. So it's not a standard quartet, it's cello, violin, clarinet, and piano. Very gorgeous, also, of course, very sad piece, but worth a listen if you ever get the chance. If you get to hear it live, it is not performed frequently, so please do. If you see it, go check it out. Hindemith was not quite of the age where he could have been interred, but he did marry a Jewish woman, and thus he wrote several variations on Jewish themes, which unfortunately I don't know, but one day hope to play. Today, I'm going to play for you 2 movements of his sonata, strangely enough, because the third movement is a fugue, and I didn't think you could stomach it. Also, I can't play it. But Hindemith is lovely because it keeps sounding like it's going to be weird, and it's just normal enough. say a couple of words right before we end, but I am going to cut him off and say a couple of words first. Okay, cool. You know how I played Bach a little while ago, and now Bach is done, and we're not going to have any more Bach? Well, you're wrong! Bach is back! So, César Franck wrote this chorale in A minor. And if you may have noticed, Bach wrote his Prelude and Fugue, or at least the one I played, in A minor. And interestingly enough, the opening of the Franck is very suspiciously similar to the Bach. Let me just give you a little taste so that you can get it back into your ear. Here's the Bach. Right? Here's the Franck. Coincidence? I think not. Justin?
Yes, I'm back again. And I figured it's my job as the director of music to first thank Conrad for coming. So could you please give me another round of applause? I told you Evie were coming out to see. Aren't you glad you came? So just a couple of quick things for me before I forget. Again, if you were interested in any information, you can find this basket in the archives of the church. Again, thank you all for coming out today. It means a lot to me, and it certainly means